The program presented this evening has been specially prepared for this, the 36th South African Zionist Federation Conference. Its aim is to reflect the story of thousands of South Africans now living in Israel. Olim, who with determination, flexibility, patience and humor make their contribution to the renascent Jewish state, facing a trying and difficult period in its short history. The voice of the South African Jewish community living in Israel will be heard at this conference. 7 Olim took part in a panel discussion. They form a cross-section of ex-South African settlers who've been in the country from 1 to 5 years. No script was prepared, questions were posed, and the answers are unprompted, unrehearsed, perhaps not polished, but sincere and genuine. Each one did it his way. Some are still seeking their way. Nevertheless, there is a common denominator.
I don't think that I could ever think of living anywhere else. It's home.
I find it very gratifying. I find it one of the most satisfying factors of my aliyah, the fact that I feel people care about you in this country.
I'm living in a country which stands for something so much more dear to me than I ever recognized in South Africa, where I was born. And ultimately, I suppose, in every decision, one wins a bit, one loses a bit. And I've lost, but most important, I've gained what I wanted to gain. And that's a sense of belonging in this country.
It's also a country with enormous chutzpah. And if you don't...
Because we're starting something new. We're trying to do something that, that nobody's tried before. That not only has brought us to Israel, or we had the feeling, the emotional attachment to the country, it's given us an added perspective of chalutziyut, if you want to call it that.
By purely coming on Aliyah, one immediately became part of a totally Jewish society, where I can build up together a nation where I count as a member of that nation, where where things are being done, I'm part of it.
I find it a hell of a interesting over here. I must say, there's never a dull moment in Israel. And I think that we now live in a broader society. We live in a complete society.
Harry Shulman, Leonie Rubin, Bernard Susskind, Hershey Pachter, Edwin Ehrlich, Sheila Zettler, Herman Musikant. Israelis now, from all walks of life, living today in the city, on the moshav, in the kibbutz. Herman, you're living on kibbutz today with your family, 4 children. How did you make the adjustment?
The most difficult lesson for me personally to learn was to change from being someone recognizable by his colleagues all round to someone who was no one. And I mean no one, not even equal to the Chavayrim. I was just a strange animal amongst a group of people that were living together. This was perhaps one of the hardest things to learn, to accept that as far as the kibbutz are concerned, in the initial stages, they are only interested in Herman Musikant, the man, and Daphne, the woman and the children, not interested in what I had done in the past or what particularly my ambitions were for the future as far as anything was concerned.
So has Herman Musikant accepted this?
Herman Musikant has got to go through the very hard process, and it's a very critical process of getting accepted on the kibbutz terms, not on Herman Musikant's terms. And this is something that one has to learn. And In the end, I suppose it's not dissimilar to if you had to take any position in a new company of employment. If you wish to share a responsibility, you have to go through a period of complete acceptance where people are able to view you from all ways of your conduct, including your family.
But don't you feel that you may be compromising your personality, your character, your beliefs?
Everything that you do has a balance. It's a question of where the scales weigh. My answer to you is that certainly we are experiencing an agrarian way of life. Certainly I am far more involved with my family, me personally. I see a lot more of them, I participate with them, whereas I would say that with my older children I have an intellectual relationship, a close relationship nevertheless. With my two younger children I have a complete participant relationship. The difference is substantial.
I think initially a certain amount of compromise is required, because after all one is essentially a stranger in this country, even though one is a Jew. And I think my problem was in the first year or year and a half was that I actually wanted to believe that I could find South Africa here. I could find the beautiful beaches and I could find the essentially unpressured, almost a quiet life back home. And then I realized this isn't South Africa, and I didn't come here to find South Africa. I came here to find myself to a certain extent and to find an Israel which I have a certain vision of.
Eden, if we're talking about academic achievement, you're a third-year law student in the third year, in your third year in the country. Are you satisfied with your academic achievement?
My first year in the faculty was a very, very difficult year. Absolutely no doubt about that. And I even entertained thoughts of possibly turning back midstream. But for the encouragement both of South Africans and of Israelis. Most encouraging of all was the fact that there were South Africans or Anglo-Saxon or Lim ahead of me in the faculty who said, we were in your position and you can do it.
Were you lonely at first?
At first lonely in the sense that I perceived myself as an outsider. I had a large circle of Anglo-Saxon and especially South African friends. But initially there's that trepidation. Israelis don't know you, I don't know them. Most people have to go through those stages. It's a question of self-image. I think initially coming to Israel, leaving one's family, leaving one's friends, leaving all one's support systems, one's thrown on one's own, in my case into a learning environment, and to stand on one's own feet initially is difficult. But after one actually sticks there, as Israelis say, you've got the cheshek to stay there, then in fact one begins to reap the rewards of being a young Oleh coming to Israel, and I think they're innumerable.
You know, the main thing here is that what you learn here is to overcome the difficulties and to adjust. And also they teach you here to improvise. You know, if you haven't got a 5/16 drill bit, so you use a 5/8 and you make the hole smaller afterwards. You know what I mean? Something like that.
Do you ever get the feeling that you just can't take it anymore, that all the standards that you find in this country just not your standard, and you've got to go to somewhere where your standards are?
Well, you know, the pushing and the shoving and the screaming and the shouting and that, you know, like if you go, you know, like going to the bank, you know, this is a typical example. You know, you sit in you're standing quietly in the queue over there, and the guy says, he says he's just got a question he wants to ask the guy there. The question is, can he make a deposit? So he takes everything out of his pocket and he pushes in the queue, and you overlook it and it aggravates you a little bit. But then afterwards, you just pointed out to him that there's a queue there. The other thing is like the privacy in the banks. You know, you go in to ask what your balance is. And this was in the beginning. I must admit that it's changed. But the guy would go away and he'd shout out something like 10,000 minus from the back over there. You know, the guy would look over your shoulder to see the balance. Coming from South Africa, all the bad sort of scene is you don't see it. You know, you don't really see it. It's kept away from you. You don't mix in North Street at the bus station where Patka buses travel, and you don't mix with a mass of the population. What happens is you tend to come to Israel looking at everybody here as if they were the South African Jewish community, and it just isn't that. I was a salesman in South Africa selling furniture. So on the Merkaz Klita, the absorption center at Mevaseret Zion, they suggested a carpentry course, and this actually sounded like a good idea because having worked with furniture, I knew a little bit about the wood and about that sort of thing, and I did a retraining program to learn carpentry and started my own business.
Why? Why did you have to do that?
Well, first of all, when we came on Aliyah, I had no I was completely open-minded as to what I was going to do in Israel. People said to me, well, you know, what are you going to do in Israel when you get there? I said, when I get there, I'll see what's doing, because it's no point, it's a different situation. So in the beginning, I had to start off just doing general handyman work, which was painting. And it was quite interesting walking down the main street in Ranana where I live, covered in paint. You know, I was such a good painter that half the paint was on me and the rest was on the floor. But it was quite interesting. I compared that to sort of walking down the main street in Johannesburg covered in paint, schmutzig, you know what I mean? And I thought to myself, I really feel good because you know, people don't even look at you. They didn't even give you a second look because they just accept the guy's a painter, so he's a painter. The same as the guy who delivers the newspapers or whatever. No, I think that what has to happen here is that you don't give up. That's all. If you want to live in Israel, you just don't give up. That's all. That's, I mean...
I think one has a long-term perspective. I think this is why you come in the first place. But you cope every day. I think I do 10 times as much living a day here than I ever did in my life. And it's much more exciting, certainly.
Don't you find yourself tending to adjust yourself to the norm, and the norm may be, for instance, raucous behavior?
Sometimes I wish I could, but I don't. But I find that one can change one's environment. Perhaps. I feel it's one's duty to contribute something, perhaps, even if it's just being nice to somebody and not being part of the things that irritate you or make you feel not so good.
I think in the ultimate analysis, I think Israelis do appreciate why we came here, and I think if every Ole who came here were to give up that uniqueness that he brings, I think that we bring something unique as South African Jews. If we were to give that up and compromise together with the hodgepodge of cultures in this country would be nothing. But I think it's precisely because each small cultural group wants to stand by what is unique to them that in fact brings the genius to this country.
Take a bit from what you brought with you from South Africa, take a little bit what you've learned here, and by mixing the two together, come up with what is right to do.
And I found that Israel, in my opinion, is not a subtle society. In fact, if they are doing so, they've got some, it's also a country with enormous chutzpah. And if you don't deal with it on the basis of not being innocent, no, it's an innocence. It's an acceptance that if you don't ask a question, you don't know what the answer is. As they seem to react on that basis.
Harry, how did you come to feel at home in this country? What did you have to do? What did you have to overcome in order to feel at home in this country?
I think one of the most important factors is that you have to establish yourself at work. You have to succeed. And once you've managed to overcome the initial barriers at work, I think a lot has been done towards feeling at home.
What barriers did you have to face at work?
The two most important hurdles, I think, which one has to overcome is the language barrier and the second barrier of establishing yourself.
Now, you're working as an administrator in an Israeli firm.
That's correct.
Are you accepted as an equal today? Do they listen to you when you speak?
Yes, completely. I have no problems with establishing myself. There's no question of lack of authority. I feel I have the same type of authority in Israel over the people with whom I work as I had in South Africa.
But how do you achieve that if you don't have Hebrew and you're a newcomer, as it were? You have to establish yourself. How do you go about establishing yourself?
Well, in my own field, I believe management is management, whether it's in Israel, whether it's in South Africa or America. And I think if one is able to perform competently, it's the way to establish yourself. There were adjustments to be made. An interesting adjustment, for example, was the fact that I wasn't used to commuting by bus. And when I started work, I didn't receive a company car. And I had to travel to and from my house by bus. I found this a very big adjustment, particularly in the hot summer. I found it something that one had to get used to. And it's like most things, you have to adjust.
Your wife works as well. She didn't work in South Africa, I understand.
Right.
Do you accept this? Does this not upset you?
No, I accept this completely. In fact, she enjoys working very much. When we came to Israel, she didn't work for about 9 months, and it was at her instigation that she started to work. She enjoys it. She works half day, which gives her time with the children in the afternoon. She leaves after they've gone to school, and she gets back before they come back.
My wife has been working in the profession as a beautician since we arrived, and I feel that from my experience I wouldn't have been able to manage on my own earnings for the simple reason that I didn't start my own profession here.
So no one has second thoughts here? No one has ever thought about going back to South Africa? Is that it?
You know, Tsavi, there are good days and there's some very bad days. There's some days when I think we all consider the fact of returning, days when the wife's depressed and work's been lousy and you've been pushed around, and when the kids are referring to the Opa and Oma back home. I think it's at times like that that the difference between those that stay and those that go comes out. Because at a time like that, I think those that stay really have to resort to what they've got here and what they've come for. I revert again to what I spoke about a long time ago, about the Zionism. As far as I'm concerned, it's the same factor which brought me here that keeps me here at times like that. I revert again to the basic reason with me at Zionism, and that keeps me here.
But Harry, if you were to lose your job tomorrow because of the economic situation, and you can't find the house in Rehovot that you want, and you have to go and live in a smaller flat, what are you going to do then?
You know, Tsavi, I already have to live in a smaller flat, and I think I would keep trying. I really believe that those that are staying here are committed to overcome the problems that they have. It takes time, and if you really are committed to building yourself up in this country, these problems, although they may seem very serious, I don't believe are insurmountable.
Do you agree?
I think that in the beginning, the children also didn't want to. There were plenty of times that my middle son wanted to pack up and used to cry and want to go home to South Africa and things like that. But now, funny enough, the children, are I think the ones that are slowly converting my wife to being able to stick it out and overcome all the hardships. And there are hardships, as everybody knows. That
Israel today isn't the land of milk and honey that our prophets prophesied years ago. It's a difficult country. It's a new country. And people are uprooting themselves from South Africa. They're tearing all their connections. They're leaving their family, their business. Some people were very successful in businesses, and they sold up, they came to Israel, and all of a sudden they were nothing. They were no longer managers, and they were no longer directors, and they didn't have 2 cars, and they didn't have servants around them. It's a difficult country. People must realize that it takes a lot of time to undergo this adjustment.
Herman, living in Israel, has this changed in any way your relationship with your children, as you compare it with the situation that you knew before?
A kibbutz itself endeavors to develop the individuality of the child. The child of the kibbutz is very, very independent. But also they tend to make decisions for themselves, discuss the problems themselves. If they have a problem, they will ask us, as opposed to be told. That's an absolute intricate part of the education that takes part on the kibbutz. We find it very satisfactory, and we are happy with it because we can see how our children are developing. They certainly are very much more independent and tend to want to fulfill their own thing as they're going along.
I was just going to add that I think that this independence that the children have is not only on the kibbutz. I think that living in the town as well, we've learned to accept that the children are a lot more independent, especially the older ones, even the younger ones. But when my eldest son, who's 17, goes out, he comes back whatever time he comes back. And if my daughter is 10, is out playing with her friends after sundown, we don't worry at all. She comes home 7:30, 8, whenever she feels like it. Very free.
I find that the extent of their freedom is very good for them. I find my children have grown tremendously in this country. They've matured. They are independent, and yet I think we're still able to retain a type of discipline, a discipline which I think is important in every family. I think they know their place, which I find very important.
Yeah. Set the game up and we'll play.
You want to play as well?
I received a call from Harold today. They want us to go out next week. There's a feeling of mutual satisfaction between people, and I find it very gratifying. I find it one of the most satisfying factors of my aliyah, the fact that I feel people care about you in this country.
By purely coming on Aliyah, one immediately became part of a totally Jewish society, whereas in South Africa, the Jewish society was always a minority. And this, to me, is the most exciting part of my Judaism. If one looks at festivals, I feel that there's a national feeling towards festivals in Israel. When it comes to Pesach, not only the religious people clean out, everybody cleans out. And you ask if people aren't tolerant, there is a tolerance, there's a sense of a holiday approaching, and everyone is preparing for it, whether it's in a religious way, or whether it's in a traditional way, or whether it's purely in a national way, no religious grounds to it. But in South Africa, when it came to a festival, I had to steal away from work. I might have been in the middle of a concrete pour, and I would have to say, excuse me, it's getting late, I've got to go to shul now. And we'd be a minority in preparing for Pesach, for example. Over here, everyone's doing it. I finish work earlier when Erev HaChag. I'm a Jew, I'm living in a Jewish homeland, and it's an experience that I didn't have in South Africa, so therefore I feel that my religious life has been strengthened considerably. Just a small story. Erev Sukkot, I went to the automatic banking machine to draw some money, and you put your card in, you ask how much you want, you get the money out, and it gives you a little receipt as to how much you drew. And at the bottom of this card it said, Chag Sameach. And to me, this was it. I wasn't in South Africa, it wasn't Christmas, it wasn't Easter, I was in Israel, it was Erev Sukkot, it was just about to be a Chag, and the machine told me Chag Sameach. I knew I was home, I was a Jew, and that really makes my religion strengthen.
I'm not a religious person, and the sense of Jewish identity that in fact I had come to Israel for didn't lie within the kippah, within the keeping of the Chagim, although undoubtedly I have a very deep affinity for that. It lay in things like speaking Hebrew, in recognizing that in fact Israel was the only surety of Jewish survival. Whereas I know, for example, that Hershey's children would grow up to be Jewish in South Africa. I couldn't be sure about my own. In this country I know my children will grow up to be Jewish and will choose whichever form of Judaism they wish.
I didn't come here because that was the best alternative. I came here because that was it.
On the road to Manof, the South African moshav just established in the Galilee. On a barren hilltop, with a breathtaking view of the Mediterranean, a new pioneering form is emerging. Manof in Galilee.
We're trying to establish something with a difference, something that takes the best out of two worlds, combining the communal living on one hand and the idea of giving people free rein on the other. We're industrial in that we're in an area that it's almost impossible to be an agricultural moshav. And we are starting two types of industries. At the moment we have two what we call central industries, one being a photo processing lab and the other an artificial gemstone cutting and polishing industry. When you travel around the area, there are a number of mushavim coming up. The settlements, the Jewish settlements in the area are springing up like mushrooms almost. And I think that it won't be long before the Galilee also looks a little more like the center of Israel with more Jewish inhabitants. I now see that something is being achieved. Now that we've been there for 4 weeks now, 3 weeks, 3.5, some of them. But there are 35 families up on a hill, everybody so occupied in getting things straight, so occupied in trying to get things done and to make something. I foresee that in the not too far future, not too distant future, we'll have something beautiful going up there.
You know, the first time I came to Israel in '74, I came back from Israel and I felt, to come on Aliyah, you've got to be a Meshuggah. Well, I've now been here for 3 years, and I know you've got to be a Meshuggah to come here. And being a Meshuggah in my terms means somebody who actually believes that things can get better and actually is prepared to commit himself to making those things get better. And I find myself still with all that energy.